Okay. So Be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach, I'm going to send out and I'll attach onto the YouTube Bezat Hashem a picture of the learning. We're in Parshas Bahar Ois Hey, continuing, and we're turning the page now. And the Rabbi was just teaching us. Rabbi was just teaching us about how we need to get to Yovel after 7 times of counting 7 shemittahs, right? So a person lives, the pasuk says in Tehillim, 70 years is sort of like considered a full life. It's Hashem said, I'll reach 120. But 70 years is sort of like considered a full life, and from the age of 20, the Gemara brings down that a person that begins to be a bar onshi, the person is able to be held accountable for the things he did wrong. Like a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah is chayiv in mitzvahs, but the accountability begins only from the age of 20, and therefore what that leaves you with is 50 years. And that 50-year period is called in Chumash a world. When it speaks about the slave that wants to stay with his master, it says V'havadola olam. It says Olam Moshel Yovel. And so he's saying every person in their life from age 20 to age 70 goes through that Yovel experience. And he says, then in the Yovel year is the year that the fields go back to their owners, and the slaves all go free. Because selling your field, your ancestral part of Eretz or selling your person to become a slave. This is the Meshulach, the Yaakov, a very deep word about kind of spiritual refinement. And so long as Baruch Hashem, sorry. Okay, but then when the Yovel year comes, um, אבל לאחר שבא היובל, אשר אז פוסק שם דבריה, אשר אין יכולת בשום אדם לעשות סיבוב רצון השם יתברך, which is when Hashem shows us that there's no power for any human being to do anything against Hashem's will. So therefore, how could it possibly be that some other person owns my plot of land in Eretz Yisrael or owns my body? Were acquired through the depths of the will of Hashem and of the person. But your connection to the land of Eretz Yisrael and your connection to your very self, this Hashem does not want that during the 50 years, this could it could seem like the other person is buying it, but you cannot say that this is really Ratzon Hashem. I skipped a few lines here. That the earth, the Eretz Yisrael, cannot be sold in a forever kind of a way. For you are all sojourners and dwellers with me. Even though there are other kinds of acquisitions that can go back and forth, the land of Eretz Yisrael is something that is very deep and very rooted in who we are in Olam. In the next paragraph, now that is that great consciousness that we can arrive at through the 7 times counting the 7 years out of the 49 years of Shemitah. Now here it gets very, very deep. As we've been saying, that the Shemitah year is this year of Shali Shalach, where we have our own consciousness, our own sense of self and effort, and we give it over to Hashem. And then Yovel is this very high transcendent place called Shalach Shalach. What's yours is yours. To realize that even our own efforts were never ours. Only thing that's really ours, as we said, is our davening, which is this very wondrous thing, because davening in its depths is the very davening of Hashem, so to speak, davening through us. So it's this very subtle, amazingly high place of the Yovel of Shalach Shalach. What's yours is yours. Yovel, we cannot skip there, like we saw last time on Thursday. You can't skip to get to the Yovel. You have to 7 times over keep giving up, keep giving back, keep desisting from working the land. Each step, it's a very hard thing to be shomer shmita, especially when that's your main source of income. To not treat the produce of the land as an economic thing, but just to be subsisting and receiving. And as we've been learning, just to let the land be receiving its energy directly from Hashem, and to respect that process of the earth itself, not being there just for us, not being an object for us to use, but for it to be turning back to its source, which is Hashem, and not to bother the earth, like we learned. Don't want to bother the earth by if we work the land, it's disturbing it from receiving the energy that it gets from Hashem, so that it can then put that energy out into the next 6 years after that Yovel. So there's this tremendous process of giving up, letting go again and again and again, 7 times over, 7 times over. And only once we've done that for 49 years, and we just learned this represents the bulk of the person's adult life from age 20 to age 70. Each person experiences Bezat Hashem a good 50 years of Mitzvah Hashem. Another 50 years after that will take us to 120. But especially that 50 years is bringing us in a microcosmic way in each person's personal life to this experience of counting 49 and then getting to 50. So I guess let's leave the phone here. Okay, I'm gonna try and now transfer. It's a Baruch Hashem. Nice to keep the phone with it so it doesn't lose a hotspot. Okay, Baruch Hashem. So now he's relating up the concept of the Yovel year to what comes right before Shemitah and Yovel, which is the story of the person who cursed Hashem's name. And he's going to relate this up thematically to the idea of Shemitah and Yovel. Someone getting a share, thank you so much for opening your home. Hi. Thank you. So sorry. I'm just the mom's in the middle of teaching. So now he's going to relate this up to that story of the Mekalel. Thank you very much. I'll be done in 2 minutes. I got to be in his phone also. Okay. And so he says, V'zehu yovel asher yuchul avoidei shmita v'kin nichtav zu hasedra achar parshas haMekalel. Right after the story of the Jew who cursed Hashem's name, Shehayanokev es Hashem. Here's what he says, what was wrong with the person who cursed Hashem's name. This is typical of the Ishbitz, that really the person who cursed Hashem's name really wanted to connect in the deepest way. He just didn't know how, right? So what was his mistake? He didn't want to go through the process of Shemitah. As the Midrash says, that he brought his tent to different tribes to try to join them. He brought them the tent of Dan, and they sent him back, and they said, you can't be with us because your father wasn't from Dan. And he said, well, but I'm still Jewish mitzad my mother. Right? He had the unfortunate situation that his father was Egyptian. And so the way you decide which tribe you're in is by the father. So he's 100% Jewish, but he's missing the identification of a father that would tell us which tribe he should be in. So he said, look, the female is much greater than the male because the female is what sets the Judaism of the person. In spiritually speaking, we're speaking about free choice and beyond free choice, and how the Shemitah is bringing us some light from that place that is beyond free choice. And so he said, look, spiritually speaking, male represents free choice, and female represents that light that is beyond free choice. So he said, look, I'm coming from such a high place. He says, because they're above that place of free choice, that's why women are exempt from time-bound positive commandments, says Ishbitzer. He says this is something he speaks about in a number of places. That would be an interesting thing to look into. Since anyway, Hashem is eventually going to show us that everything is beyond our free choice anyway. So why should we even try, right? This is a very profound, spiritual stance. It's a mistaken stance, but it's coming from a great longing for that light to just be here right now and not to have to do the work of trying and kind of slugging through things. And
Now, the truth is, he says, that the halacha is that if the mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish because the female is the essence. Eish is chayil teres bala, rak shebezeh ha'olam. But in this world, in order to come to where we need to come to, asher ein yachol zavola tachas rak dei birurim, we need that male side of the free choice. As Chalak HaMegadef of this, so the curse, the Jew who's cursing the Mekalel argued against this. Since in the end there's going to be a Yovel anyway, and Hashem is going to clarify all the deeds of humanity. So Lama Li Birurim, why should we even have to even try now? Let's just skip to the end right now. The Ratzah Likanes LeYovel Bli Shmita. He wanted to go straight to Yovel with no Shemitah. Mamish Kavaltik, right? It's really unbelievable. That's what the Zohar Kodesh says in our Parsha, Parshas Behar, Daf Kuf Chet Amud Bet, Hai Pegume Nishar Bey, V'hainu Shehu Kamo HaEved Asher Pater Me'ol Machusa, Rakeven Sheba Yovel Az Mashir Shem Lakol. It was that Hainu Shehu Kamo HaEved Shehu Pater Me'ol Machusa, Rakeven Sheba Yovel Az Mashir Shem Lakol, Moshe Hainu Mitzrayim Shem Yisrael Zacharnas HaDagah. Right? That the trouble is that when a person says this, when a person says, I just want to go straight to that place where there's no free choice and Hashem reveals everything. When a person does that, it's like the Jews who said in the desert, we remember all the free food that we had in Egypt. It's like really what happens in the Yovel is that a slave who says, I want to stay with my master forever, so you pierce his ear, but then he does go free once the Yovel year hits. This Mekalel, this Jew cursed Hashem's name, we'll see more about what that means, that he cursed Hashem's name, who wanted really to go to that place of Yovel and skip and get there, by not wanting to own the reality of his own free choice, he was like the Jewish people saying, I wish we could go back to Egypt and eat all the free food that we had there. He wanted sort of like a handout. He wanted everything to be done for him with no effort at all. This, by the way, is very related to the fact that the Rambam in the Laws of Tshuva brings up the paradox of free choice and divine omniscience. Why is that in Hilchos Tshuva, of all places? Maybe it should have been somewhere else. So this is a natural question that could arise when a person is trying to do tshuva. That a person could feel, well, look, Hashem knows what I'm going to do anyway. Hashem knew what I was going to do anyway. Hashem's in charge of everything. Everything I can improve. This is very related to us now. The month of Elul, and this is a act. It could be that you have free choice. Just know that you really do have free choice, and that you are responsible for doing tshuva. So it's really like you have to just take it on faith that you do have free choice. Rabbi Nachman spoke about this a lot, and he said, how do you know you have free choice? Because you can see, you can choose if you want to do something or choose not to do it. You can experience your free choice. It's not so far away of an idea, but you can see how there's a corridor that if you walk down it too far, you can really lose yourself and lose your sense of free choice and feel like, oh, Hashem's doing everything anyway. Why should I even try? And that was the mistake of the Mekalel, and we're going to see this a lot more tomorrow, B'ezras Hashem, when we pick up on the Chassidus. Okay. Now, we're continuing with the halachas of the holiness of the fruits. And we finished up talking about which things have the holiness of Shvis. We spoke about flowers, we spoke about herbs, we spoke about medicines, and so on. So now, what uses are you allowed to put fruits of Shvis too? So let's see. actually, there's one more thing I want to do. I forgot to put before that. Before we do the uses, is to recognize that there is an isser called sfichim. Sfichim means things that grow of their own accord. Of course, everything on Shemitah grows of its own accord, because we're not allowed to plant or work the land. However, Chazal made a special rabbinic ordinance, which was to forbid the use and the eating of grains, vegetables, and legumes that grow on the Shemitah year, or that are picked on the Shemitah year. Tavua, kitnios, yirakos, shar gidulei sada, and Israel shana shana, shetzamchu me'atzmam b'shna Shemitah, athurim midurabanan, gzera mishum ovrei avera. Why did the rabbis make such a strict rule? That's a lot of stuff. All the grains, all the legumes, all the vegetables are all forbidden completely. They have the holiness of Shvis also, as we're going to see. They have the holiness of Shvis, but we can't eat them. We can't make use of them in any way. Why? Because too many people were saying, oh, this wheat grew on its own. And so here I am making bread out of wheat that grew on its own, when really it had not grown on its own. They had in fact plowed the earth and planted it and made sure that it would grow well. There were too many oivrei avera. There were too many people who were breaking the law. And so the sages instituted a major restriction. This means that there's no such thing as eating challah made from Shemitah wheat. There's no such thing as eating salad made of Shemitah vegetables. All of them are forbidden to be eaten or made use of. What is left is just basically fruits and berries that grow on bushes that last from year to year. Whether it's animal food, whether it's human food. You're not allowed to eat them. You're not allowed to feed them to an animal either. You're not allowed to save the seeds to plant in the next year. Not even allowed to smell those things that have a nice smell and are grown for that. Juices, you can't say, well, I won't eat the carrots, but I'll make carrot juice. No, also a problem. So what do we do with sfichim? Smachim ha'asurim be'isur sfichim mitzvah la'okram. Those things which grow that are forbidden under this category called sfichim, the mitzvah is to uproot them. Uksha'okram, you still have to be careful as while you're uprooting them, not to damage them, because since they do also have the holiness of Shvis, they have this double thing. They have the holiness of Shvis, which means you cannot cause them to be destroyed, and you cannot certainly use them for business. But on the other hand, you can't eat them either. So what can you do rabbinically because of this rabbinic ordinance? So what can you do? The mitzvah is to uproot them, but not to then squash them or rip them or destroy them in any way, since they do have the holiness of Shvis. You rather just uproot them and put them down in their place where they can just rot away on their own. If you're worried that people might pass by and not know that these sfichim are forbidden rabbinically, then you may bury them. Fruits of a tree or bushes that last from year to year, there is no rabbinic ordinance against sfichim. Kash, that means the hay, shel tvua, ein bo iser sfichim. the hay is not aser afil im hitchilat vol itzmok b'shmita, but the gargirin, the seeds, the grains are forbidden. V'chein muter lizratu lifnei shmita k'dei sitztach b'shmita k'shiyardu. Some also allowed. You are allowed to plant if, like, these last 2 weeks, you are allowed to plant grains before the Shemitah year begins, in order that they will grow later during the Shemitah year. Now here's a trick. What you could do is, if a person is a farmer, as long as you plant before Rosh Hashanah, and as we learned before, you want to plant at least 3 days before Rosh Hashanah, ideally, so that the seeds don't start to take root on the year of Shemitah, because you don't want the earth to be doing work, changing the status quo, like we went a couple of weeks ago. But so long as you plant it sufficiently before Rosh Hashanah, and then the rains come and they grow, then if you harvest it before it's right, before it's ready, when it's less than a third of the way right, then they could be used for animal food, because the rabbis did not put the rabbinic restriction against sfichim on things that are not yet a third of the way right. This way you can at least get some animal food out of the grains. Types of herbs that grow in the wild and are not known ordinance against sfichim. Okay, so vegetables that are picked on the Shemitah year are forbidden because of sfichim. If they started to grow before the Shemitah year, let's say now in the 6th year, even though here we have a quirk. With the laws of sfichim. If you change, you still don't hear me? Can you hear me okay? Okay, now, Baruch Hashem, okay. I'll lean a bit forward. If you have grains or vegetables that reached sufficient growth before the Shemitah year came in, right? Right now, your grains have reached a third of the way of being mature. Or you see vegetables also that reached a third of their growth before the Shemitah year enters, then since their main growth happened before the Shemitah, therefore have the holiness of Shemitah. Let me see if maybe if I connect to different internet. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, I hope it's gonna just keep working. Zat Hashem. So if you have a grains or vegetables that reached their maturity before the Shemitah year began, then the rabbis did not put the Isser. They did not put the prohibition on to the legumes, vegetables, or grains that reached maturity before Shemitah year, even though they were picked on the Shemitah year. And even if they grew mostly on the Shemitah year. They grew, but as long as they had that first third before the Shemitah year began, then they're not part of the prohibition that the rabbis put on the legumes, grains, or vegetables. Why is that? It's because the whole point of their prohibition was that people were actually planting things on Shemitah and growing things as normal on Shemitah and saying, oh, they grew on their own. They're sfichim. That's what the word sfichim means, things that grew on their own. So if something actually grew before the Shemitah year, well, that was not part of what they put the prohibition on. So any vegetables, grains, or legumes that reached a third of maturity before the Shemitah year will not have the Isser of Sfichim on them and will have the holiness of Shemitah. I'm sorry. So that means that what I said before about eating a challah or having a salad that is kadosh, it is possible. It's just extremely rare because there are, in Israel, the way the seasons work, there are very few grains or vegetables or legumes that have reached most of the maturity before Rosh Hashanah, but then get picked on Shemitah year. They're very, very. If that would happen, then it's just. But most the way the seasons work here, it generally won't happen. But it could theoretically happen. What about an etch? Oh no, so an etrog. We did etrog. Fruit tree. Sorry. We did hay already. Okay, sorry. What about after Shemitah? Vegetables that started to grow on the Shemitah year and continued into the 8th year, the Isser of Sfichim, the prohibition of Sfichim continues. And they're usher, even if they're picked on the 8th year. How long are they usher? Until the time when that same type of vegetable can be planted and grown on the 8th year alone, right? Let's say I have a cucumber that grew on the 7th year and continues to grow into the 8th year. So that cucumber is going to be forbidden, but only for a certain amount of time. Once the new cucumbers from the 8th year that were planted in the 8th year are harvested on the 8th year, then the tzvichim from the 7th year become permitted. Or until Hanukkah, there's a cutoff date. Either then or Hanukkah. As soon as Hanukkah comes in, you can start to eat them. And of course, you still have to eat them with the holiness of Shemitah, because they grew mostly on the Shemitah year. I believe that's true.
Eating them with the holiness of Shemitah means exactly what here?
We're going to get to that tomorrow. Exactly what does it mean to eat the Shemitah fruits with the holiness? It means basically to be being careful about waste. That's basically what it means, and we'll see tomorrow the details, or start tomorrow. It'll be a few classes probably. It'll take us all the way till Shabbos. There's a whole section in the Sefer about Shemitah in the kitchen, and what we do l'maaseh. We're finally going to get there, B'ezrat Hashem, tomorrow. Now, things that grow in land that belongs to a non-Jew do not have the Isser of Sfichim. And same thing if the non-Jew planted them on the Shemitah year. Now here we get into the question that we're going to deal with next week. Like starting tomorrow, we're going to learn about how to actually eat the Shemitah fruits, how to dispose of the Shemitah fruits, what's the normal way, and what's the halacha. Next week, we're going to look into the whole idea of Otzer Beis Din and Heter Mechira, which is dealing with the different kinds of hechshers that we're going to start seeing all around Eretz Yisrael. And the Heter Mechira is the idea that started, and we'll learn the history also, started a good more than 100 years ago. We'll see the exact dates, you'll give me that one right now, that you can sell the land of parts of the land of Eretz Yisrael to non-Jews And this is very, very important, even today, because there are big industries in Israel that produce. I'll get you details of exactly what actually today gets done, but there are grains, legumes, vegetables that are produced in Eretz Israel. And if the land wouldn't get sold to a non-Jew, then not only would they have the holiness of shemittah, but they would be forbidden rabbinically under this, we'll be learning about, under this prohibition of sfichim. This would cause huge trouble all over the country, because not only is there a rabbinically forbidden, lots of rabbinically forbidden food flooding the market, it also goes, the taste goes into the vessels. So let's say in hotels and restaurants that are not as scrupulous with kashrus, you could have a real kind of a disaster. And so the rabbis did not put their prohibition of sfichim. So we're going to learn more in detail about how this exactly works. What does it mean to sell land to a non-Jew? Are you allowed to? Under what circumstances are you allowed to? But as far as this prohibition of sfichim goes, the legumes, vegetables, and grains that are grown on land that is owned by a non-Jew, even if the non-Jew planted them on the Shemitah year, they do not carry the prohibition of sfichim. So there is still a good reason to for the heter mechira to continue, which it does. It's still a big major issue of dispute, as we'll get into the details of, but particularly with regard to this rabbinic prohibition, it makes a big difference, as I said. What about sfichim that grow inside of a house? So the rabbis did not put their prohibition there. If you have, like we've been learning about, if you have a potted plant and you're growing, I don't know, some inside your house, you're growing some tomatoes or something like this. They are not prohibited. So these are only when they grow out in a field. However, this is only when they're mamish indoors, like we've been learning about, because anything under the open sun is rabbinically considered to be outdoors. So even though it's like right next to your house or something, that's a problem. It's only when things that are actually mamish grown indoors. And this is true even if they grow in a potted plant that does not have that does. I'm sorry. There's a machlokas about it. Does it have? We spent time on the potted plants that have a hole in them, the potted plants that don't have a hole. As we said, there are certain substances that are considered to block the plant from its connection to the earth, and some that are not. So first of all, so long as you're indoors with sfichim, it doesn't matter. So long as you're indoors, there's no isser of sfichim. There's no prohibition of sfichim. What if you're outdoors? Then there is, if it's in the ground. But what if it's outdoors, but it's in a pot that has no hole in it, and it's blocked from the ground? There's an argument about whether a person should be strict on it. And generally speaking, you could be lenient with, let's say, tomatoes that grow in a potted plant outdoors. Okay. On the other side of the Yarden, okay, this is something that we did not yet do. Zat Hashem, I'll try to fit this in also before Shabbos, which is the map of Eretz Yisrael. In fact, maybe I think I might be able to just show it to you right away. I have here, I think I actually have it open, right? Yeah, Gavaldik. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Oh, the map of Eretz Yisrael. Where are the borders of Eretz Yisrael with regard to Shemitah? So you have this area here that's called the Arava, which is a very fruitful area. A lot of vegetables and grains are grown. And this makes a big difference because according to most opinions, and this is the 30-degree latitude, 30 degrees above the equator. According to most halachic opinions and the Badats of Yerushalayim, the Eida Charedis, holds like this, that anything below this 30-degree line is considered chutz la'aretz with regard to Shemitah. That means these towns of Grofit, Yotvata, Timna, certainly Eilat, are considered to be chutz la'aretz. Everything grown below the 30-degree line, not only does it not have the prohibition of Sfichim, it doesn't have the prohibition of Shemitah at all, completely, because when the Jews came back with Ezra in the times of the Second Temple, they did not settle this lower southern area of Eretz Yisrael. And so that would mean that, and the Badatz does this apparently to this very day, that fruits and vegetables that are grown there are actually not subject to the laws of Shemitah at all. The other side of the Yarden, the Eber HaYarden, also, for today, we're just going to say with regard to the laws of Sfichim, that's our topic for today, is that there is no prohibition of Sfichim that grow on the other side of the Yarden. So grains, legumes, vegetables that grow there are not forbidden. We'll see tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem, in terms of the holiness of Shemitah, what parts of the other side of the Yarden do have some of the laws of Shemitah, as we'll see tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem. This prohibition of Sfichim, even though we said that certain herbs that grow in the wild and that are not normal for people to grow in an organized kind of a way. Certain like very simple edible herbs. My son knows about certain things that you can kind of eat. There are these I forgot what they're called, but they're people who know how to hike in Eretz Yisrael. They know these little herbs that grow. They're very like small and insignificant, and no one grows them in an organized way. They are not subject to the laws of Sfichim. But what about if a person comes across something like cucumbers or tomatoes or something that is grown in an organized way by people in their gardens, in their fields, but it's growing in Hefker land. It's growing in land that does not belong to anyone. It still has the prohibition of Sfichim. So that means if you come across vegetables, grains, legumes that are growing out in the wild on the Shemitah year, you're not allowed to eat them because they still carry the prohibition. Okay, Chevra, today was a crazy day to start off the learning in my car and move over here. And I'm sorry everything was so whacked out. My family planning got a little off. I hope you're able to get something from it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Shavua Tov, and tomorrow we'll continue with the Heilig of Beis Yaakov, where we'll get into more of Shemitah in the kitchen, and more of and also I'll put into the first few minutes the map of Eretz Yisrael and exactly where Shemitah applies. It doesn't take so long to learn it, and now that I have a nice map, we'll do it tomorrow.